This season of Towards London is sponsored by Webisodes, a full-service story studio that tells real stories about communities through social and interactive experiences. This podcast was recorded on the traditional territory of the Anishinaabe, Haudenosaunee, Ottawandaron, and Wendat peoples. This territory is covered by the Upper Canada Treaties.
Shobana?
Adam, there's one thing I don't understand about last week's episode.
What's that?
The music at the end.
This music?
Yes.
What about it?
Why did we play that? It's like slide guitars and drums and real actual hand claps. I thought the show was about financial technology and something more high-tech would have been more appropriate. This is something out of the Old West.
Well, that's exactly it. I got the vibe that the blockchain segment was like hearing about new frontiers in FinTech, with cryptocurrencies being like the wild, wild west.
Well, it seems a few of our audience members agreed with you, and they wanted to hear more from Professor Jean-Philippe Vergne at Ivey Business School at Western University.
So this week, we're going to release the full interview with Professor Vergne, minus a few bumps and clicks. It's a lot longer than most episodes, but fascinating discussion that covers not only cryptocurrency, but the future of music and video distribution, government control of monetary policy through technology, and digital piracy. Arrgh!
Bless you. One housekeeping note, when we recorded the interview in August 2017, the price of Bitcoin was a lot lower than what it is today. We've left Professor Vergne's answers intact, so you'll hear that lower number referenced. For now, here's the full interview.
Professor Vergne, thanks for joining us. We're going to start off with the tough question. Who are you and what do you do?
So my name is JP Vergne, and I'm a professor and a researcher at Western University's Ivey Business School, where I also run a research center that's specializing on blockchain technology and FinTech.
Are you from London originally?
No, I'm from France originally, and I moved to London 6 years ago now to join the university.
Given what you do, can you define FinTech for us?
So FinTech is a shortcut for financial technologies. But it's not a very good term, I think, because it basically, it just shows that maybe the financial sector is the first sector that's going to be affected by the rise of these new technologies. But I don't think there's anything financial per se about the technologies that we're talking about, because it ranges from advances in mobile technology to peer-to-peer networking, to blockchain technology, artificial intelligence, and machine learning. So all these technologies are found today in the financial sector and can be potentially disruptive for the financial sector, but they can be disruptive to many, many other sectors. So the way I would define FinTech is basically a bunch of new technologies, and I gave some examples, that are basically doing three things in multiple industries, across multiple industries. The first one is that it's creating decentralization. So if you think of peer-to-peer networking, it's really technology that allows people to operate in a decentralized, in a distributed way on the internet. So the second aspect is disintermediation. So if you can transact peer-to-peer for exchanging music or for making a payment, basically what it means is that you don't need a distributor in between. And so in the case of music, maybe you don't need the record stores anymore. In the financial sector, maybe it means that you don't need Visa or MasterCard anymore, or maybe you don't need your bank anymore to process payments. And so basically you're removing an intermediary. And this is a very interesting aspect of FinTech. And this is where the disruptive potential lies. By removing an intermediary, you're basically removing a middleman that's taking a cut. And so you're lowering transaction costs. And you're making, everything smoother. And so it means that certain incumbent actors that used to be central in particular industries, if they become disintermediated, their business may be at stake. And so this is a very interesting aspect of these technologies, that they're forcing a lot of companies to react if they want to survive in the long term.
So obviously you're a professor at the Ivey Business School. What are your primary areas of research focus?
Well, so the way this went about is that I started doing research about industries and organizations that were socially contested. And I was interested in the relationship between social contestation and innovation, to the extent that it creates evolution in capitalist economies. And so I did a lot of work on piracy. And how over the last few centuries, the phenomenon of piracy has basically been very much related to the notion of innovation and to the death of old industries and the creation of new ones. And this is how I got into the blockchain space by looking at how communities of hackers in the 80s and in the 90s came up with new technologies which were illegal and socially contested at the time, but eventually led to creating some of the building blocks that shaped Bitcoin, the first cryptocurrency created ever. And that was in 2009.
Professor Vergne, what do you mean by social contestation?
Well, socially contested means that there's a large portion of civil society that would find a particular practice or a particular innovative practice, in this case, to be unacceptable. And it can be for many reasons. So if you think of industries like the weapons industry or the tobacco industry or gambling, these are all industries that sometimes we call the sin industries that are socially contested, sometimes for moral reasons, sometimes because of the harm that they can cause. And in the particular case of Bitcoin, originally the social contestation was coming from the fact that it was dealing with technologies that were very, very sensitive and could actually jeopardize national security, or at least that was the official version that was proposed by the government, at least in the United States. And so in the 90s, for example, it was illegal for hackers to create new tools for cryptography and exchange them with some of their peers across the world. Because by sending an email containing a new innovation in terms of cryptography, you are essentially exporting a weapon abroad. And so cryptography was considered to be a matter of national security, was considered to be a weapon. And so innovation was very much hampered until very recently, when the policy around cryptography became a little bit more flexible and allowed hackers to actually work on these new technologies without having to worry about their consequences.
You know, I remember in Los Angeles in the 90s, you could buy T-shirts with computer code for the software to break DVD copy protection silkscreened onto the actual T-shirt.
For the DRMs?
Yeah, somehow it was legal to export the T-shirt, but not the actual app. I think it was the same was true for that PGP strong encryption software as well.
Yeah, and it's very interesting to see that it is something that different forms of piracy have in common. Pirates are very creative when it comes to building new tools or new services, but also very crafty when it comes to hiding them or transporting them from point A to point B. So innovation is not just about the content, but also it's about distribution of that content.
So earlier you said that the financial industry is going to be the first one that's going to be impacted by blockchain and other technologies. Are we going to see this impact on any other industries as well?
So what Imogen Heap has been doing, or more recently, Zui Keating, is basically using blockchain technology, which is essentially a distributed ledger that's public and transparent. Using this blockchain technology to distribute their music without having to rely on record labels or licensing authorities or copyright holders associations. So basically what it means is that in the past, an artist had to contract first with a record label, and then that record label would contract with a distributor, and then the sales would happen, and then we would have to find out what goes back to the distributor, what goes back to the record label. And once that is done, the record label will have to figure out how to pay out royalty, so copyright licenses, back to the artist who was singing, back to the performer, back to the person who wrote the song. And sometimes this is very difficult, and in fact, today it is estimated in the US that there's more than $2 billion worth of royalties that are unmatched to the appropriate creator. So there's this huge kind of fund that's available, and nobody knows where the money should be going. So it's now on the stock markets, and some people are just benefiting from that. But so what Imogen Heap is doing is basically cutting out all these middlemen and uploading directly her music onto the internet and using the blockchain to basically track ownership and of the songs. And so basically she can decide for each song how much she wants to sell it. And there's like different arrangement depending on whether people want to download, like acquire the song, or they want to rent it, like stream it, or whether they want to use a snippet of that song, maybe because they're doing a movie and they need some soundtrack for their movie trailer. And so basically every possible type of licensing right can be decided upon in advance by the artist. and sold in a very flexible way using blockchain technology.
Okay, and how does this help music distribution?
Yes, so blockchain technology is basically a new system for managing distributed databases on the internet in a dynamic and secure way. So basically what it allows people to do is to all converge onto a similar database. And multiple copies of this database exist across servers, across a particular network on the internet. And there's no central authority that basically has the master copy of the database and that can tell this is the state of the database right now. So it's a system whereby all the nodes in a network come to a consensual agreement about the particular state of a database. And what it allows essentially is to remove the need for a central authority. So for instance, if we had a blockchain system to store and track ownership of videos, we wouldn't need YouTube anymore. We wouldn't need Google to have central servers where they store all the videos that are uploaded by YouTubers. And so the advantages of blockchain compared to other ways of managing data is that it's decentralized. So you don't have to trust anybody with your data anymore, and you don't have to pay a cut to that middleman anymore. It's also more secure because there is no single point of failure. So if you want to attack a particular network, let's say you're a hacker, like you're a black hat hacker, and you want to basically do harm to a particular network, then you would look for the central node where all the data are stored, and this is the point that you would attack. In a blockchain system, everything is distributed, and every node basically can potentially have an entire copy of the database. And so to basically attack the system, you would have to attack every single node in the system. In the case of Bitcoin, for instance, which was the first implementation of blockchain technology in the field of payments, you would have to attack thousands of nodes simultaneously to be able to destroy the data or corrupt the database. And so blockchain is decentralized, no middleman, and it's also secure.
I think it's probably a good time to have a step back and try to understand what blockchain technology actually is. Can you give us kind of a broad overview?
Yes. So blockchain is, and that's also a part of the reason why it is very secure, is that it helps create a file, digital file that's basically timestamped and matched to a particular owner at a particular point in time, and that is protected by digital signatures and strong cryptography. So basically, it makes it impossible for somebody in the blockchain network to make a digital copy of a file without other people noticing it. And essentially, it creates scarcity in the digital world. And that's the first time we have a robust technology, a digital technology that can help us create this scarcity. So the data that are stored in a blockchain cannot be copied indefinitely without other people noticing it. So in a technical computer science term, it means that you cannot double spend a particular bit of data that you have. It's very important to not be able to double spend a particular bit of data, because it means that if you buy a song, then the artist that made the song can be sure that you will not make free copies of that song and distribute them to your friends. In the case of payments, it means that if you own a particular unit of Bitcoin, you cannot make a copy of it to be able to purchase twice as much merchandise as you would normally. And so it's a protection against theft. It's a protection against illegal copies of digital files.
Earlier, you described blockchain as a global ledger. When it comes to Bitcoin, music, or anything else that's being distributed through the blockchain, what does that mean?
Well, it's a ledger that does not care about national borders. So it's inherently global. Because anybody can join a blockchain network. Like most blockchains are like public ledgers, and so anybody can join from anywhere in the world. And the only way you can prevent somebody from joining the Bitcoin blockchain network, for instance, is by cutting off their internet connection. There's no other way you can prevent somebody from doing that. So indeed, blockchain-based networks are inherently global. borderless, and it's a great thing. But at the same time, when you look at particular implementations of blockchain technology in domains such as payments, banking, or the music industry, it means that there's going to be some difficulties because every country has their own regulation when it comes to banking or when it comes to a copyright law. But so if you want to build a global company to distribute music or to make payments, then you're going to have to deal locally with different regulators. And this is where the difficulties begin. The theory is great. It looks good. Blockchain technology can do amazing things. But if you want to implement it, then there's a whole bunch of invisible costs that will appear at once. And a large chunk of these costs come from compliance with regulators in every national territory in which you want to operate. And that's a big difficulty for actually making blockchain solutions happen in the real world. And that's why the development of the technology is usually faster than its implementation. We know all the things we can do, but we haven't done them yet because it takes a lot of time to figure out how to make it work in a compliant way.
So obviously we've all heard about Panama Papers, and there's always that reference to offshore shelters. Is blockchain and Bitcoin the next big place where people are going to hide money from governments or creditors? There
are two aspects that need to be considered. The first one is the fact that using these networks, payment networks, such as Bitcoin, is very easy because they are open networks. Anybody can join. And indeed, you don't need to provide identification or bank account number or even a real world address to be able to use these networks. So they're basically open to anybody, including criminals. But the second thing to keep in mind, and that's a very important one, is that blockchain systems are all about tracing transactions and keeping an immutable record of all transactions that happen in the network. So it means that if you're using Bitcoin to conduct transactions that are illegal, well, you have to know that all these transactions will be recorded in the blockchain forever. And the blockchain is basically a transparent database that can be accessed by anybody. And so the records of these transactions are available to anybody, including like the police, the FBI, the CIA, and any kind of government authority, really, including tax offices. So I would say if you want to get involved in criminal activity and make payments, cash is king, and cash will remain king for years to come. And actually, you have seen in recent years a number of governments in the world trying to fight corruption, tax evasion, and criminality in general. What they do is that they try to diminish the importance of cash, diminish the use of cash in society, and force people to opt for digital alternatives. And that's exactly what happened in India last year in November, when the government implemented overnight this surprise demonetization policy to remove the higher denomination bills from circulation, because apparently these bills were used by criminals. And so by pushing people to use digital channels, you're basically pushing people to make transactions that are always recorded in a database, unlike with cash. And so I don't think the criminality is going to be a major issue in the future, because actually it provides new tools for enforcement when people use digital technology such as blockchain.
So right now today, who's accepting Bitcoin? Where can I use it? How widespread is the adoption of Bitcoin?
So you can use Bitcoin to pay for anything. And the question is, can you pay directly in Bitcoin, or do you need to use a service that will basically exchange your Bitcoins for another currency before the payment goes to the recipient? And today there's not so many merchants that basically accept Bitcoin as a form of payment. The number of merchants that are doing that is growing, but it's not like exponential. There's no mainstream adoption yet. But one has to keep in mind that there's many cryptocurrencies that are competing for adoption, that there's still not so many governments that officially recognize Bitcoin as a means of payment. But recently there's been a major development when the Japanese government decided to recognize Bitcoin as a legal means of payment, as legal currency in Japan. And it's a major development because it's the first time that a large economy, one of the world's biggest economies, is actually saying officially, okay, we consider Bitcoin to be an illegal currency. And so I would tend to think that other governments will follow, and that will trigger massive adoption.
You know, you don't tend to think of the financial institutions as kind of being super ahead of the curve, technologically speaking, but it does seem like there's more and more going on. So what's going on?
I think the characteristics of the financial industry make it particularly prone to innovation, to certain types of innovation. Financial markets operate with very small margins. A lot of the financial market actors, think of traders, are basically earning a living by making millions and millions of transactions with a very, very small margin. And so for these people, being able to decrease costs, even by only a tiny fraction of a percent, can make a huge difference at the end of the quarter on their bottom line. And so these people in the financial markets, whether it's like banks, traders, hedge funds, etc., are really always on the lookout for new opportunities to reduce costs. And I think this is why certain types of technologies are particularly interesting for them, and they tend to jump first because they are looking for these very small marginal incremental improvements on their bottom line all the time. And for them, it makes a huge difference. So blockchain in the stock markets, for instance, could allow people to keep records of transactions when people buy or sell stocks or bonds, and would dramatically cut the reconciliation costs when there's like a mismatch between two actors on the financial markets, and they bought and sold a lot of securities from each other during a day, and at the end of the day they have to do reconciliation to make sure that they know who owns what. And that can be very costly. It's like humans that are basically, you know, picking up the phone and calling their counterpart, making sure that they agree on the state of the database, because they each have a copy of the database but it doesn't match. Blockchain technology basically removes the need for that, because the databases that are shared across the actors are constantly up to date, or constantly identical. There is no need for reconciliation at the end of the day. And so it's a very interesting technology because it's faster and it's cheaper.
So you're the founding coordinator of the Crypto Capitalism Center. What is the center? Can you tell us a little more about it and its mandate?
The Crypto Capitalism Center is a research group that I founded 3 years ago, and that I'm still coordinating today, based out of Western University. And it's basically supported by the university and by government grants. And it's a research group that focuses on analyzing the consequences for capitalist economies of the rise of these technologies that we've been talking about. And the idea being that if we manage to remove a lot of the intermediaries that we've had in capitalist economies for centuries, the economy will look very, very different from what we used to. The capitalist system is by design an intermediated one. We've had central banks since the early 17th century, basically running the economies across the world. We've had banks that are basically financial intermediators that help everybody make transactions, etc., etc. This is how capitalism has been for about 400 years now. If we have technologies today that allow us to potentially remove, at least partly, some of these intermediaries, we will be living in a very different economy. And some people say that we should come up with a different name for that economy, because it will not look like the capitalism we've known for the last 400 years. It will look like something else. So some people have proposed the term crypto capitalism to describe an economy that's disintermediated, and where people are able to transact peer-to-peer using cryptography as a source of trust, as opposed to using intermediaries as a source of trust.
So is the center set up to respond directly to the industry needs, or is there a different focus?
So our main focus for now is to produce academic research, because we believe that we need to understand what's at stake. And the phenomenon is so new. So Bitcoin was created in 2009, but it came under the spotlight in 2013, maybe. And entrepreneurs started to massively get interested in that only a couple of years ago. So it's very recent and we don't know much about how it's working. So what we want to do is produce like solid research results so that people can understand, for instance, how the price of Bitcoin is formed. So people can understand what are the organizational consequences of using a distributed database to coordinate work within and between companies, as opposed to traditional management hierarchies. We want to produce knowledge on how blockchain technology can disrupt or not certain industries and why. And so that's our priority, and we want to basically put Western University on the map as one of the leading places in the world where good research, solid academic research on FinTech is being produced and published. So this is step one. But of course, we are constantly in touch with businesses in Canada and beyond who come to us to participate to events. And we're trying to make the connection between the academic research and the real world. And this is really where we position ourselves. To build a dialogue between entrepreneurs and researchers, and so we can share knowledge. Our primary mission is not to do consulting for private businesses or individuals, but we do engage in conversations with these people on a daily basis.
So your group is really looking at what technologies are emerging and the effects those technologies will have on the economy? Yeah,
exactly. The effects that these technologies have on different industries, how they work, how fast they're adopted, how they change the nature of transacting between companies and organizations, but also within them. We're basically looking at a number of topics that are at the crossroads between sociology, economics, and political science. And so it's a very interdisciplinary research group because there are so many things in society that are affected by the rise of these technologies that we don't want to stick to one perspective. Maybe it would be economics. We think that would be very limited and that we would be missing out on a lot of the interesting stuff that's happening out there.
Now, in the past, you've told me that some of the work you do is pretty sensitive and confidential, but are there any active projects you can talk about?
There's a lot of stuff I can talk about, yes. So one project that we started working on about 2 years ago is a project that aims at understanding how the price of cryptocurrencies, such as Bitcoin, is formed. And it's been a mystery, and it's still a mystery for many people. And that's a question that I get asked a lot. It's like, why does Bitcoin has value? Like, why would people spend $3,000-$4,000 to buy one Bitcoin? Like, how come it's $3,000, not $1,000, or like not $10? And so we're trying to understand how this price is formed and why does it not stay flat? And so there's a very short, simple, and a bit stupid answer to this question. It's like supply and demand actually explain the formation of the price. But the supply part is actually pretty easy to figure out because the supply of these currencies, cryptocurrencies, is very predictable and it's embedded in the software code that's open source. So anybody can predict how many more units of Bitcoin are going to be put in circulation in the next 24 hours, in the next 3 months, in the next 2 years. So what is left to understand is demand. Why would people want to buy these cryptocurrencies? And there's a number of reasons why people would want to buy them. The basic reason is that they create value in new areas. So they allow us to do new things. So we talked about Imogen Heap and how it can basically allow to create new business models for artists so that they can distribute content, sell licenses, things that they were not able to do before. And the second area where it allows to create value is by cutting costs in already existing industries. So we've talked about banking and selling securities on the stock markets. There are huge economies to be made by using blockchain technology in this area. And so if you think of a regular transaction that's taking place, say, with a Visa or MasterCard, where you go to a coffee shop and you buy coffee, that merchant is going to be charged 2.5% fee, maybe by Visa or MasterCard. That's in the vicinity of like 2 to 3%. It's invisible to the consumer, but we're actually paying for it. It's included in the price of the coffee we're buying. Now imagine that merchant, instead of accepting a payment with a Visa or MasterCard, is accepting a payment in Bitcoin. Then the fee will be closer to 0.1%. Which means that there's almost 2 to 3% difference between these two numbers. And that's extra margin for the merchant. The coffee shop owner can decide to maybe increase its profit margin by 3%, or it can decide to decrease the price of coffee by 3%, kind of give it back to the consumer, or it can decide to split it in between the two in whatever way they want. But what it does basically is that it creates new possibilities for value creation for a lot of businesses. And so if you think of all the transaction fees that are basically paid out to payment processors like Visa, MasterCard, Western Union, PayPal, etc., on a yearly basis, if you replace all these payment processors by cryptocurrencies, you're basically freeing billions of dollars. And these billions of dollars explain why Bitcoin has value, because Bitcoin is creating the possibility for freeing this cash that is now being captured by intermediaries. And so it's actually possible to estimate how much value can be created in new industries and how much cost can be cut in existing industries. And this is how we can estimate demand for cryptocurrencies. And since we know the supply, if we can estimate demand, then we can have a pretty good idea of how the price is going to evolve in the coming months.
So you're saying there's a very quantifiable valuation in the ratio. It's almost like a profit to earning ratio or a bond yield?
Yes, you could totally, if you only look at the cost cutting part, you could say that the value of Bitcoin is the sum of all the costs that it will allow people, all the cost cutting that it will allow people to make. And so that's all the potential earnings that will come out of Bitcoin in the future. And if you can estimate these earnings, then you know the price of Bitcoin today.
We've been talking a lot about banks and hackers and traders. What about governments? Are they interested in this technology at all?
So the governments are very interested in financial technologies for a number of reasons. I'm going to maybe take one example that relates to blockchain technology. So governments are interested in blockchain technology to the extent that it can help them improve their control over money supply. So here the main player is the central bank. So central banks are basically in charge of money supply. So they produce the cash, they produce the coins that are in circulation, and they also need to maintain a particular balance between money supply and money demand in the economy, and they do that by adjusting the inflation rates and working with the private banks that also issue a lot of money in the form of loans. Like when you get a mortgage, that's new money that's created. But the central bank plays a role also in ensuring that the overall balance is maintained. The central bank is also in charge in many countries of ensuring that the economy is healthy, that organized crime is not diverting substantial resources away from the mainstream economy, that people are paying their taxes, etc. So this is where blockchain can play a role for them. So as we move to a system based on cash to a system based on blockchain technology, central banks get an opportunity to have an immutable record of all the transactions that occurred in the economy for a given period of time. And it means that it becomes a lot easier to fight crime, to fight tax evasion. And as we move from cash to a secure digital token, it also becomes a lot easier to fight counterfeiting of the currency itself. So there's like a number of advantages that would explain why governments and their central banks are particularly interested in blockchain technology. And it's also interesting to think what they could be doing in the future. So today, in a country like Canada, nobody can have a bank account directly with the Central Bank of Canada, which is called Bank of Canada. You have to have an account with TD, with Scotiabank, with RBC, etc. But in the future, at the technical level, there's nothing that could prevent any central bank in the world from opening up the possibility for businesses or private individuals to have a deposit account directly on the record with the central bank. And there's even potential in the long term to disintermediate the private banks, and the governments are in the middle of this story, and they're exploring a number of possibilities. So it's a very exciting area, and actually everybody's looking at it, not just like communities of hackers, innovators, entrepreneurs, but also established businesses, governments, and regulatory authorities in many industries where there's issues of something like counterfeiting or something like tax evasion or something like records that are missing. As soon as we have these elements somewhere in an industry, blockchain can be an interesting solution.
So, okay, I'm curious. We're not near Ottawa or Bay Street. So what makes Western the right academic host for the center?
So Western is a really good place to do this because it's got a strong research culture. And it's located in a really interesting area. So the corridor that ranges from London, Ontario to Kitchener-Waterloo all the way up to Toronto. There's a very dense concentration of academic institutions there with really good research that's been done in the last few years on a number of related areas that underpin this transformation. So really strong computer science departments, mathematics department, economics departments, computer engineering departments, etc., etc. And in fact, one of the biggest innovations in the space is something that's called Ethereum. So as of today, it's the second largest cryptocurrency by market capitalization after Bitcoin, and this was created in Toronto. And today, this cryptocurrency Ether that's related to the Ethereum foundation is worth more than $40 billion. I would have to double check that. I haven't looked at the price. So I was on holidays before, which technically would make Ethereum the largest unicorn that Canada has ever had in the space. So it's potentially a $40 billion organization that we have there, and that was created in Toronto just a few years ago, 3-4 years ago. Unfortunately, that organization, Ethereum, has moved to its headquarters to Switzerland for regulatory reasons. And Canada has been maybe not as responsive as it could have been, and that's a pity. But there's a lot of efforts that are being made right now by the Canadian authorities to be able to keep the Canadian innovators in Canada. That area is a really interesting one because you've got the researchers, you've got the capital, venture capital, you've got the entrepreneurs, you've got highly trained, highly educated people who want to start companies, and it's all in one spot. And so it's one of the epicenters of FinTech innovation in the world. And so that's why it's a great place to be doing research on that.
Okay, so before we were recording, you said that there's a, quote, cool, unquote, feature of Canada that makes us sort of unique in cryptocurrencies. Can you share that?
So Quebec has some interesting geographical features. Everybody has heard of the tough climate that you can have in Quebec in the winter time, and actually creates opportunities for a particular line of business, which is called mining. Mining is a very computer intensive process that needs to be done by volunteer participants in the Bitcoin network to be able to secure the network and create new units of Bitcoin. And so what you need to be able to be a miner is a lot of very expensive hardware, a lot of electricity, and these two things together, when they're working on full speed, they create a lot of heat. And so what you need is a cooling system. So the best locations in the world to be doing Bitcoin mining are locations where electricity is cheap and the temperature is cool enough so that you don't have to spend tons of money on air conditioning units. And it turns out that Quebec has some areas that apparently are very interesting for this kind of business, just like Eastern China, just like Russia, Iceland, and a number of other countries in the world. So it's really about finding a way to reduce the costs of mining. And one way to do that is to be located in a place that's cold.
So how can someone find out more about what you and the center are doing?
Maybe my Twitter account would be a good entry point. There's a bunch of links there to several websites that talk about the research that we're doing and all the events that we're organizing in London, in Toronto, and in other places. And so that Twitter account would be at pirate.org.
We'll put up that Twitter link and others on this episode page at towardslondon.com. In the meantime, thanks to Professor Vergne for making the time to speak with us.
We'll be back next week, but in the meantime, please feel free to reach out to us on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, or on plain old email at info@towardslondon.com.
This bonus episode was a direct result of that feedback, and we do like to respond to what we are hearing from you.
Until next week, I'm Adam Kaplan.
I thought I was Adam Kaplan, but I'm Shobhita Sharma.
This has been a Webisodes podcast.